Hello. On behalf of Cure Alzheimer's Fund, good evening, and welcome to a conversation between best-selling author Dr. Lisa Genova and Alzheimer's advocate and author Greg O'Brien. I am Meg Smith. My role at Cure Alzheimer's Fund is managing our portfolio of groundbreaking research projects to accelerate development of prevention, treatment, and cure of Alzheimer's disease. Cure-Alz exists to end Alzheimer's by finding and funding the best possible research with the best possible scientists, providing seed money for them to pursue ideas that change and dramatically advance our understanding of this disease. Although we do not obtain government funding, our projects often enable our researchers to do so based on the data that we help them develop. Thanks to the generosity and commitment of our board and key donors, 100% of all other donations go to support research, every dollar we are sent. Thanks to the generosity and commitment of our donors, we have provided more than $115 million in support for almost 500 projects worldwide. We can't do what we do without you, and we know at the end of the day that it is stories like the ones that we are going to hear tonight that are the reason we exist and the reason we hope not to exist for much longer. Before I turn to our guests, a housekeeping note. This introduction and the conversation between Dr. Genova and Greg O'Brien has been recorded, but we will have a live Q&A afterward. You can type your questions into Zoom's Ask Questions feature at any time while Greg and Lisa are speaking or during the live Q&A. So now, to turn to our guests. Dr. Lisa Genova first became famous when her self-published book, Still Alice, became a runaway success and was then made into an Oscar-winning movie. It tells the story of a woman and her family living through her diagnosis and experience of early onset Alzheimer's disease. Lisa's artistry was all her own, but her incredible portrayal of the challenges of this disease were inspired by her grandmother's own struggle with Alzheimer's and by her background as a neuroscientist. She has now written 4 more books about the experience of living with and fighting against neurodegenerative disease. Talking with Lisa tonight will be Greg O'Brien, an extraordinary warrior in a very personal battle with Alzheimer's. As a journalist with 3 decades of experience, Greg was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, but he has turned that diagnosis into a crusade. His book, On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, shares his experience of living with Alzheimer's, not dying from it, but choosing to make the most of what his life offers him. We are grateful to Lisa and Greg for sharing their wisdom and their knowledge with us today, as we are grateful to all of the patients, families, and scientists who make up our community. Building awareness of this disease allows us all to talk about it freely and to join together to fight it. Please enjoy their conversation. Remember to type your questions into Zoom's Ask Questions feature while you listen, and I will look forward to posing them to Greg and Lisa in the live Q&A after their conversation. And now, Dr. Lisa Genova and Greg O'Brien.
Thank you, Meg. How you doing, Greg?
Doing okay. How you doing?
I'm all right. It's good to see you, although it's, not in person.
Have we met before?
Once or twice. But yeah, it's been a while. Because of COVID, we don't get together as much.
I know, it's just a bizarre time. And I've told people before that the isolation that we're all feeling is akin in some ways to the isolation of Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Yeah, because it's one of the things I know you deal with regularly, and it's very common for folks with Alzheimer's to feel excluded and not called anymore, and people kind of shy away from you, and you're kind of missing all of that connection and touch and conversation. And now we're all living it because we're all squirreled away in our homes.
It's kind of a two-way street. There are people, and because we've talked about it before, that feel awkward, and so they don't reach out. There are others who do, but because you wrote the seminal book on it. It's a plug for you, Lisa. I have your book right here. I just wanted to tell you. I know this is a shameful plug.
I got you too. Back at you, baby.
Well, how about this one? There you go. All right. So before people start to leave, we should go.
All right.
All right. So what the hell was I talking about? Wait a minute. See, that's what happens when I get funny. I forget what I'm talking about. But
so put all the time, but it's fun to be around you.
So there's isolation that you feel from people who don't want to hang with you anymore because they feel awkward.
Right.
And then there is the fight, which I'm going through now more and more, where I withdraw. And I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but you know my family. I'm even at times awkward around my own children, because other than Connor, who I deal with all the time, because I don't see him all the time, and I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, or if you know what I like about people, and there's only a handful now, that if I want to just sit there and not say anything, they understand and they don't have to make conversation. I think that's an important point in this journey for people to understand. You don't always have to talk.
Yeah. And that someone else's Alzheimer's isn't about you, right? Isn't it funny how people make your Alzheimer's about their comfort level? So
Yeah.
it's about, I think, for one of the take home lessons I learned in all of the years now that I've spent around people who have Alzheimer's is ask questions, be curious. Don't, like, if you can ask the questions like, hey, what do you need? What feels good to you? Or just pay attention to what you might need. Like, oh, Greg needs, like, I've been around you so many times where you're like, I just got to go to Pluto for a while, which is your code word for like, I just got to check out and be quiet. It's just too much stimulus, too much noise, too many people. I gotta just be quiet for a while because it's just overwhelming and too much. And so that's okay. Like, just you do you, and it's all good. So rather than that making me uncomfortable or making me like freak out and go into fight or flight in some way, it's like, this is part of Alzheimer's. It's no reason for me to be afraid.
Well, you understand because of your family, and you understand because we know each other. But the desire to withdraw is growing more and more with me, and it's just part of the deal. But I only feel comfortable with fewer and fewer people. Mm-hmm. And you know what's funny? And you went to Harvard, so you could explain this more. That's a plug for Harvard, by the way. Okay, so now I freaking forgot. God damn it.
You said you were withdrawing.
God damn it, right?
Withdrawing, and it's happening more and more.
Yeah. And you just do it, and then you worry about how people are going to respond. And so that creates stress inside. And so the stress level becomes higher and higher. And then people who don't get it will show up and say, oh, I didn't remember where I parked my car, and I lost my car keys. And I usually drop an F-bomb then, but we have a nice, genteel audience, and I can't. And, I'll tell them the story, because I don't, as you know, I don't drive anymore because I had an accident with my car, and the local police took it away, and the doctors, because I shouldn't be driving. But there was a time on Cape Cod, the Brewster dump, and you remember my yellow Jeep with 4 doors on it.
Absolutely, yep.
Went to the dump and dropped, the step at the dump, and then I sat there and said, "How am I going to get home?"
Right.
And then I said, "Well, I could call my kids, I could call my wife, I could call a friend." I was staring at my yellow Jeep, and in the moment, my mind would not tell me that was my car.
Right. So you didn't recognize your car as yours. You didn't remember that you had just driven to the dump moments ago. Yeah. So you shared this story with me, and I actually included it in my new book, Remember, the nonfiction book about memory. And that's such a great example, because people do look at you and say, well, he looks fine. Yeah. He doesn't look sick. He doesn't look like he has Alzheimer's, which is such a strange thing to say, because you don't look at someone and say, well, you don't look like you have diabetes.
So I tell people, do I look like I just peed in my pants? Because I did. Do you want to see? And I know that's just horrible, but I don't want to.
You love getting a rise out of people.
But yeah. I as an Irishman, I love to do that. But I want, one of the things I want to talk about. Well, you're in charge. I already said that. But be good to talk about at some point where I am on my journey. but also stereotypes. But you lead me, and we could talk about anything.
Well, you hit on so many of these good ones already. So the idea that, like, you know, so many people don't really appreciate the difference between normal forgetting and forgetting due to dementia and Alzheimer's. And your example of the Jeep is so good because it's profound memory loss that you deal with all day long to try to cope and get through the day despite not remembering that you drove to the dump a few minutes ago, looking at your yellow Jeep and not recognizing that it's yours. Your brain doesn't tell you, it doesn't give you that memory that this is my Jeep. It's different from walking out of the dump or the grocery store and thinking, oh wait, where did I park? And that's mostly for most people because they weren't paying attention to where they parked in the first place. So this is a very different, profound kind of memory loss that you have to navigate through every day. Greg, the withdrawal you talked about, and you said you worry about how that's impacting the people in your circle. What have you noticed? Like, how is it affecting folks? What are you seeing?
Well, it's different because everyone's different. The people who know me and love me the most and understand will, when I drift out and was, you know, Lisa, you know this, but I'll just say it again. Alzheimer's took a lot of family members. I lost my maternal grandfather to Alzheimer's. I lost my mother to Alzheimer's, my paternal uncle and my father. And I have the APOE4 gene that appears to be on both sides of the family. And there are times when the stress, and again, in what you study, you know, is so overwhelming that I just have to leave the planet. And I wanted to come up with a place that I was comfortable going to, and I could tell people so they wouldn't freak out. And so I called it Pluto. And I said, I'm just going out to Pluto. And so there are times when I drift out. Now, that freaks some people out, but I'm not at the stage where I can care about that anymore. I don't mean that in a bad way, but people who know will come over and it's touch. Maybe Lisa, talk about touch, why it's important. And they won't say, hey, dumbass, if I could say the word. I'm going to say those words anyway. Wake up. No, they'll come over and they go, okay, Greg, are you okay? Or come on back. And that tells me in the moment, I'm coming back to a safe place. And I know there are people listening who are dealing with this in family or themselves. And I'm saying, that's just a good strategy. Don't yell, just say, hey, it's okay. I love you. Come on back. We're here.
Yeah, it's like when I see you going into that state, it feels to me a lot like, as a metaphor, like when your cell phone battery is really low and you just got to plug it in for a little bit and let it charge. So that's Greg just charging back up, because it takes a lot of energy for you to be on, right? To appear, quote, cognitively normal. So you're using a lot of juice, and it goes, when that battery gets depleted, you need to recharge. And you're right, to then approach you with with gentleness and safety, and like, hey, we're here, like, when you're ready, are you okay? Like, do you need anything? Or just, we're still here. It's not a time to quiz you. It's not a time to, like, you know, see if you're just not, we don't reality orient. Like, you know, do you know what day it is? Do you know what time it is? Do you know where you are? Like stop.
They would carpet bomb F-bombs if someone said that to me and walk out.
Yeah, well, a lot of people used to think this is what you're supposed to do. It's like you're supposed to stay with it in that respect, and it's absolutely not the way to go. So yeah, just a gentle, safe place for you to land when you're ready to come back to us.
You mentioned, and I'm writing some notes down here. And by the way, I do have some notes, and I was told I can't have notes, but so can I just, real quick, I'll be quick.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies is Chevy Chase's Christmas Vacation.
I know.
Okay, so remember when Chevy was going to go down the mountain, and he sprayed on his disc this spray that could accelerate, and then he tells his crazy brother Eddie, do you want to go? And Eddie goes, I don't want to go down the hill with just a plate in my head. And he said, do you think it really matters, Eddie? And what I was going to tell you tonight in Alzheimer's, notes really matter. But it's a double-edged sword, Lisa, because I've been trained as a journalist, and like you, it's not us; it's a gift from God. However you want to define God, we were blessed with a good intellect, and we've taken care of ourselves. The Rudy Tanzi shield and all that, and so that allows us, in some cases, in other cases, people aren't able to do it. It gives us some rope, but to be in the moment 100% of the time kicks the crap out of me, and you know this, so I want to say this right. It so upsets me because I want to fight for this disease, having lost so much, but when I fight so hard, I feel people aren't getting it, not knowing the toll it's taking on me to get there. And so I say to myself, screw it. Are you going to feel better if I just fall into a blob on the floor, or do you want me to fight? And I've talked to a lot of people, as you have, in this disease, who have that, and you know, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Depends on how big the pin is. I don't know, but sometimes people are able to do things that others can't. And but when you try, and a lot of people listening, I'm sure they understand that, or their loved ones are trying, or they're in the throes here, working through the Cure Alzheimer's Fund, which is an incredible organization. I want to honk the horn for them. They're doing God's work. But it becomes debilitating, because you'd say, are you going to feel better if I just get hit by a train? And nobody cares about Alzheimer's. Nobody, that's a bad thing to say, until they go to your wake. And I feel that I know that's not accurate. I know that's
you can feel that way. Yeah.
But that's how I feel. Nobody is going to care about the journey, not just my family, but the journey I'm on, the effort that it takes, because my mother, who is the hero of my life in Alzheimer's, taught me how to fight this. And if it wasn't for my mother, I wouldn't know how to do it. But no one's going to say, oh, geez, well, I'm at his wake. I just read his obit. I'm going, that's a little too late to care about Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on something super important, which is that I think that even today, most of the world still carries a misconception about Alzheimer's, which is probably a little easier for people to deal with, which kind of has to do with denial and kind of has to do with the stereotype of, well, this is a disease of the dying elderly, and so I can just ignore it. And doesn't that make me feel a lot better, because it's uncomfortable to really look at Alzheimer's and really recognize the journey, because it isn't pretty. It isn't glamorous. Like, you're working really hard, and it's, you know, so many people can't imagine you, Greg. Like, we've known each other since 2011, I believe. And that's a long time. People don't think of someone, you know, being able to carry on like you have for this long with Alzheimer's, and yet lots of people do. So I think the conception of Alzheimer's, people immediately click to imagining someone dying with Alzheimer's, and they don't imagine what living with Alzheimer's looks like and sounds like and feels like. And we don't want to like romanticize it or Pollyanna rose-colored glasses it. Like, it's not easy. It's a life worth living, and your life is extraordinary and meaningful and so important, and I'm so glad you're here. And it's really freaking hard for you to walk this journey, and I think that it's enormous courage for you every day, and I think it takes courage for everybody to be willing to be with, you know, Alzheimer's and really take an honest seat to witness it. So I mean, like, this is the battle you've been in, right? Like, hey, I'm still here, and this is going on for millions of people, and I'm willing to like bare my soul and drop my pants for all of you to see. You've said that.
Remember, I'm Irish, and you know about Irish, so we should be careful. Anyone who's Irish would know what that was joking about. So, we have to keep it funny. If you don't have a sense of humor, you have to fight Alzheimer's and faith, hope, and humor. And we could define faith in all different ways, and I'm okay with that. But until we have a cure, You need strategies for living with Alzheimer's.
Yes.
But you bring up there's so many times, Lisa, more so now than ever, when I say, and I know Tim Moore and Rudy would understand, Rudy Tanzi, my hero. By the way, Rudy has, when he takes off his coat, a red cape underneath it with a Superman emblem.
Yeah, pretty much.
And in college, he dated someone named Lois.
I wouldn't be surprised. He can do everything. Yeah.
But there are times when you'd say, why don't I just give up? I don't need to do this. Yeah. And I'm feeling that more and more. And then, so today, I was in Staples on the Cape.
Yeah.
And I go into Staples because I'm comfortable there. No one bothers me. And I sit in the very expensive leather chairs and that they're selling for $400. And I have my cup of coffee that I'm spilling on the chairs. Oh. But Staples in Orleans, they know me and they go, oh, it's just Greg. And I'm working on some notes because I knew you would do an excellent job leading me, but just to make sure I had some notes. And this woman came up and she goes, are you Greg O'Brien? And I go, do I owe you money? And she said, no, I read On Pluto. I've seen you and thank you. And so in the moment when you're saying, when I go through all this and prepare for something like this, for an interview with you, I go, how much longer it'd be so much easier just to give up. And then God, the universe, however you want to define it, sends someone into my life like that and says, you're not done. And as you know, there are a couple times along the way I should have died, and I didn't. And so it's not me anymore, it's we. And I will fight for people on the field of Alzheimer's if they will fight for us.
That's so great. And so, you've written this amazing book on Pluto, which tells the reader what it feels like to live with Alzheimer's from your perspective, the insider's seat. And I've told so many people that if your book had existed when my Nana had Alzheimer's, I would never have written Still Alice, because that was what was missing for me, was what does this feel like from that perspective? So honest to God, like my whole career wouldn't exist if that you had already written that book.
That blows me away, by the way. And you had said that, just real quick, as you know, there's a documentary you and I are working on through Steve Eccleston in Los Angeles. Have you heard about Greg? And I wasn't there when you were interviewed, and you said that in it, and it just blew me away. And at some point in the future, the documentary will be distributed, but you said that, and I just said, my God.
Yeah, crazy, and very true. So, but so think about this. So you're in Staples, and we're on Cape Cod, and it's a small community, and so you live here and you wrote the book, and so you're recognized, and you've reached that person through what you wrote, and she then recognizes you and can offer you that hello and that gratitude and that recognition of now she knows someone with Alzheimer's. But think of all of the millions of people who are anonymous out there in the Staples, in the grocery stores, in church, wherever, and the folks in that community don't know that this person has dementia and might need a little more time, a little more patience, a little more compassion and understanding. So there's a lot of education we need to do as a world, and this is part of, I know what you're up to, that it's as important as it is for the scientists to cure this thing, and they will. And we will have preventative medicine, and we will do what we can with lifestyle to prevent this disease. We also just need to figure out a way how to live with this disease and how to care for people who have it now. Like, how do we live with this disease now?
Because you have to, and you're right. Those of us on the journey don't have a choice. And as a journalist, someone who's trained to take notes and to speak, and blessed like you with a good intellect, shame on me. And my mother taught me this. If I didn't do this. And but it's difficult, because when you do it, just for anyone who's listening, and we've talked about this before, but just real quick, 60% of my short-term memory now can be gone in 60 seconds. It's just gone. Now, the long-term is different. I don't recognize people. If you put me in a place, and you and I have talked about this, I would always recognize you, but there are people that come up to me. 70% of the people, I don't know who they are, but living on a place like Cape Cod, and maybe Boston can be that place too, where people understand, they come up and maybe you can get into the touch later and say, Greg, it's John, it's Kathy, how you doing? There's a tremendous rage. There's the loss of continence, which is so embarrassing when you pee in your pants and people can see it, and the hallucinations and the loss of filter, and as I said before, we should be careful about. I know this is a group here who are listening who are well-heeled and very smart, but inheritance isn't all that it's made up to be, because I inherited through my family Alzheimer's, prostate cancer. I have neuropathy, as you know, and no feeling in my feet to my knees because brain cells, in addition, neuropathy going on. And today, we've talked about this before, I was going to my eye doctors because it looks like I had an eye bleed of some sort. I was diagnosed again with macular degeneration, which my dad had, and I've lost 40, and I'm going to keep joking, but I've lost right now, Lisa, you still look like an angel, by the way, but I've lost right now, what the doctor told me today, in 2.5 years, 40 to 50% of my vision. And I'm going slowly blind. And so I've said, okay, I could lie down, but lying down in football and in wrestling is a position of defeat, or I can press on. And that gets back to what I said before. So everyone says, oh, you look so good, which really pisses me off. And what you've heard me say, that when they piss me off, you guys can edit those words out, I guess. I always say, that's a gift, like intellect. It's not me. And by the way, I will look better someday in a coffin than you do right now. Oh. So that has nothing to do with Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, you're a young guy. You were diagnosed when you were 59.
Right. I'm 70 now.
Yeah. So again, I think most people just equate this with, a disease of the dying elderly. So weird, Greg. My grandmother had macular degeneration too. She couldn't see anything. She was listening to books on tape back in the day. Had a hard time seeing anything. I'd show up and she'd be like, "You have a pimple right there." I was like, "Really? Really?"
Well, and this is probably something for Rudy or you, but the doctors have said, to me anyway, that the eyes are the window to the brain. And in Alzheimer's, they're starting to try to diagnose sometimes Alzheimer's through diseases of the eye. And, it's in its infancy, but.
Yes, right. So that's an area. There are a lot of areas of trying to detect Alzheimer's earlier and earlier, which is going to be key to treatment as well, because we know that the pathophysiology of this disease begins 15 to 20 years before you ever show your first symptom of memory loss. So there's a nice, while that sounds terrifying, it's also incredibly hopeful and exciting, because that's a massive window of time in which we can intercede and potentially prevent this disease from ever going any further. So you'd be none the wiser.
The other side of that too, Lisa, is for the patient, is that tells people that there's life ahead. It may be different. So it's not like, sometimes what happens when people get a bad diagnosis, and, in my journey with other stuff, I refuse to do that. They roll up and die. There's, Bugs Bunny once said, don't take life too seriously because nobody gets out alive. So don't roll up and die. And a lot of people, they just do that.
Right. And so you've been such a hero for so many, because you're this living, breathing example of, what can life look like with Alzheimer's? And can we talk about it? Just the talking about it, right? There's been so much taboo and stigma and shame attached to this disease. And so people zip it and don't talk about it, right? And it's like cancer was 50 years ago when people just whispered about it. But it's like anytime we don't speak about something, it's a breeding ground for shame. And so all of this speaking that you're doing, you're talking about what it feels like, invites the conversation for millions. And while we can't cure this disease yet, we can do a lot of healing for how to live better with it. Because the disease is hard enough. These other burdens of the isolation and the shame and the feeling excluded, like we can probably do something about that.
Yeah. No, it's when you talk about it, this is a case in point that was brought home to me on Sunday in a powerful way. A few weeks ago, a very close friend of mine, Michael Saint, died of complications from a stroke. And I knew Mike in my late 20s when I was a reporter at the Boston Herald, and he was working for Tip O'Neill's son, Tom, when he was lieutenant governor. And Mike had a series of strokes, and he was like a brother to me, a surrogate brother, and we talked. And he would always ask me about what he wanted to know, what it was like, and just asking very probing questions. And this was recently, he called me, and we would talk all the time, and he called me and left a message and said very plainly, "Hey, Greg, give me a call." Well, I wasn't able to call him back that day, and I called the next day, no answer. And his wife called and said, "Michael's dead. He passed away." And I think he was calling to say goodbye. But fast forward to last Sunday, and this gets back to the stereotypes, because Mike was brilliant. I got it, and I'm going to read it if I could, an email from his wife, Ann Saint, who said, "Greg, I just want to give you an update. The Alzheimer's doctor called Friday with the results of Mike's autopsy. Mike had severe Alzheimer's, a brain full of amyloids and many bleeds. The doctors believe Mike's stroke were caused by Alzheimer's. This probably had been going on for at least a decade or longer. The doctor was shocked, but Mike's brilliance, as with yours, was the reason he could mask it well. I just thought you wanted to know." So last night, I get a call from his daughter, Sarah Riley, and she's an epidemiologist in Nashville. And she knows that we're close, and she wanted to talk. And we talked about the false stereotypes of Alzheimer's. Mike was a brilliant man. You couldn't tell what he was dealing with. And we talked about faith, hope, and humor. And then she said to me last night, she's in tears, and she said, "What happened to my dad?" Sorry, it's a tough thing. So we cried together, and I told her that her dad was in heaven now with God, free of this monster of a disease, and all that matters. But those left behind now need to keep pushing for a cure. That's what Mike would want. That's what I would want. And Lisa, she called me late at night last night, and she's a woman in her 30s. She's brilliant. And what happened to my dad? And I said, the good news is he's healed now. Now we have to heal others. Mm-hmm. And that was just last night.
Wow. Greg, and you get these kind of phone calls a lot from folks. Like, people really do seek you out for the guidance of, I've lost my spouse, I've lost my father, like, people get in touch with you and ask for, spiritual wisdom or just a hand and a hug, or a sense of, why did this happen? Or is it all going to be okay? You get this a lot. How do you deal with that?
Well, I deal with it by understanding my own imperfections. As you know, I've told you many times, I'm the biggest sinner in the world, committed every sin a man could commit, but murder and adultery, and I've been tested in both. And so you just press on. But I have a strong feeling in the Almighty, the universe, whatever you want to talk to. And until they have a cure, it gets back to the faith, hope, and humor. You have to walk in that.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else we can do. Yeah. Or we just give up.
Right.
And we look at the Rudy Tanzis of the world, and we look at the research that the Cure Alzheimer's Fund is going, and we tell people they got to keep it up. They got to find a cure. That's what Mike would want.
Yeah. And you've mentioned that you have the ApoE4 gene. I think you got a copy from mom and dad. Yes. You got double whammied there. So like we talk to folks all the time about lifestyle prevention. So
Stockings at Christmas time on your bed.
what?
It's like having 2 stockings on Christmas morning on your bed.
Yeah.
That's a joke, Lisa.
That's a gift you didn't want. So we talk about eating a Mediterranean or Mind diet. We talk about exercise. We talk about sleeping well and reducing stress. Rudy's whole shield. It's all of those things, are great at preventing Alzheimer's. And yet, if you have these genes, I mean, ApoE4 doesn't determine that you get Alzheimer's, but it heavily tips that scale. And then Alice, she had a genetic determined, her presenilin 1 mutation made her get Alzheimer's. Nothing she could do could prevent that. So for everyone who gets this, whether it's highly genetically determined or some combination of genes and how you lived, I think the focus also shifts to like, what can we do now so that the next generation never has to live with this, right? So, what is it like for your kids? Do you guys talk about, what this is going to mean for them? Do you look at, the choices they're making in terms of sleep and stress and health in terms of how to prevent this disease? And
Well, yeah, I mean, I sing off Rudy Tanzi's hymn book and yours on that. And I'm not recently, just real quick, I was asked to testify before the FDA panel on Biogen for the drug. And I knew that wouldn't help me, but it helps the next generation maybe. And so I'm worried about my kids, my grandkids, who have 50% chance maybe. And, but your kids, your grandkids, the grandkids of everyone else who's listening. And this is about the kids. It's not about us. The train's left, for me anyway. And, but I want to do what I can for my grandkids and everyone else's grandkids. And it's like my mom just saying, that's what you're supposed to do, Greg. And that's why she's the hero of my life.
Mm. Yeah. And I think all of you who have that mindset, because, I think that 20 years ago, we didn't have the scientific tools to really understand Alzheimer's and how to go after it. If you think about your cell phone and what it can do now versus what it could have done 20 years ago, if you even owned a cell phone back then.
My cell phone gets lost, so it doesn't do much.
Yeah. So it's like the technology has advanced exponentially, and we can now, there's no reason why we can't solve this if we put enough dollars and man hours behind this, if we make this a priority, right? So we have almost 50 million people in the world diagnosed, and that's got to be an underrepresented number, right? Because you're like your friend who wasn't diagnosed with Alzheimer's until autopsy. So this is a massive global problem, and I believe we have the means to figure this out before the next generation. So I think that this is a worthy, attainable goal. And I love seeing folks like you and the David Shanks and like everyone who is affected in any kind of way teaming up together. Your friend Steve, who's done this documentary film. Have you heard about Greg? Like everyone trying to sound the alarm, really. And how do we funnel enough attention and resources to the scientists so that they can solve this, and then also the conversation that helps, the humanity of living with it.
And David is the author of the best-selling Forgetting, and he's got a podcast that you've been on, and he's just doing great work with that. He's a very close friend.
Yeah, for any of the folks out there who haven't, it's called The Forgetting, his podcast, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you
Name
have
of this
a conversation. So good. So this is, what you do is so important, and you've been at it for so long. Like what keeps you going? Like what fuels you every day to keep doing this?
Well, the fuel tank is diminishing, and I don't want to be a person that says the glass is half full. but I know there's a leak in the glass. And that's scaring me, Lisa, more and more, and causing me to withdraw more and more, and is sapping more of my energy. And Alzheimer's, as you know, breaks the mind, but then it comes after the body. And so it's like the old saying, one day at a time. And I'm not happy about it. I think I told you, in addition to the 2 accidents I had, there were 2 times where I came close to taking my life. And I'm not pleased with that. And I just heard from God, the universe, it's not the time, but the time will come. And so I guess maybe to answer your question, if it makes sense, I try, like I never did before, to live one day at a time. And I do it, with mistakes every day. And, but I try to do it, and I can't, beyond that, I don't know what else to do.
Yeah. What's the memory glitch, or what's the thing that plagues you the most?
Well, it's a bunch of things. That's why I take copious notes as a reporter. It's the disconnect in the brain where just a whole segment of thought is gone. And then you go into rage. And my wife and kids see the rage, and I've been able to hide it from others. Or when I do, it's more like a Larry David loss of filter. Larry David's a hero of mine because he says stuff that we all want to say. But there are times when you go into, and anyone who is dealing with this or is a caregiver knows, you could sit here and go, oh, Greg, it sounds good and whatever. But there are times when you go into kind of a Tourette's of screaming, and it's so upsetting. And there are times when I'm in my office and a light goes out and I'm just screaming, which I'm not happy about. I'm taking God's name in vain and feel like I should be turned into a pillar of salt. And then someone in the family will come out and say, are you okay? Well, I know I'm not okay, and I don't want to talk about it. So I go, oh, okay, I'm fine. You could leave now. And because it's embarrassing.
Is the rage, Greg, just the expressed outrage and frustration at what you're losing and what you can't do, which you previously could do so easily? Or is it a pent up, disinhibited, just like a many days of frustration, just the last, straw that broke that camel?
I think, and you've heard me say this before, I cut up a frog in high school, so what I know, but I've been blessed with people like you and Rudy and others to know some of the best Alzheimer's experts in the world. And I've asked them, and what I get back is it's all the above. It's the pent up rage. Yeah. It's the loss of self and memory, but also to some extent, it's something going on in the brain that just explodes. Maybe that's the wrong word in the moment.
No, you're right. The part of your brain, we have our frontal cortex that inhibits our primitive emotion center, the amygdala, and that's a learned inhibition, right? So toddlers are really good at expressing rage if they feel angry, right? But we tell them to shh, stop that. Shh, be quiet, use your words. And we build these strong inhibitory connections. Well, Alzheimer's starts to get in there and gunk up those connections, and you become disinhibited. So you have, and your disinhibition seems to focus on rage. And I tell people, and it was absolutely true, my grandmother's disinhibition was with lust. She used to touch all the men in the grocery store, like, oh, you're so handsome. And we're like, Nana.
Yeah. Well, as I say, they're in terms of identical twins, there are no 2 patterns of Alzheimer's generally that are alike.
No, the brain's very complex, right? It would make sense that this isn't, it's not your kidney, folks. This is your brain. So it's going to look different. But, also, Greg, you're hard on yourself too. You're so hard on yourself for expressing the rage. I mean, it's part of the disease, and it's like, yeah, it would make anyone angry to lose what you've been losing, you know? So,
Yeah. Well, there are times when someone I will blow up, and someone close to me will say, "Why did you say that?" And I'll be careful how I respond. I'll say, "Because I have effing Alzheimer's. That's why."
yeah.
End of conversation. Do you need
Answer.
one more?
Yeah.
And I didn't do it intentionally.
No.
I wasn't trying to make you feel bad.
Yeah. Don't take it personally.
I'm not an asshole, although
Right.
I can be at times, but I'm not a deliberate asshole. I don't know if they could edit that stuff out, but
Yeah, so it's this is a good take-home message for some folks who are dealing with this. And, like, it's like, wow, grandpa was always this really gentle, kind guy. And now he's freaking out and yelling at people, or Nana's like being promiscuous and Stop and Shop. Like, what's going on? Like, it's helpful to understand that they're not becoming someone else, and they're not being difficult to piss you off, or they're not, this is part of the disease process infiltrating a part of the brain that regulates mood and emotion. So you're going to get explosions of primitive, moody stuff that make us uncomfortable, because we're all used to having our emotions very neat and tidy and pleasant. And so these unpleasant, explosive things are going to happen with your loved one with Alzheimer's.
That was Donald Trump.
What?
That was Donald Trump trying to call me out.
Oh, excellent.
As a joke, my phone just went off. It was Donald Trump trying to call me. Yeah.
So yeah, those kinds of explosive, uninhibited expressions of emotion are going to happen. And it's helpful for both the folks who have it to give themselves a break and not punish yourself for like, geez, why did I do that? I'm such a bad person for losing it like that. Part of the disease. It's not me. It's not my fault. It's, you don't blame yourself for having high blood sugar if you have diabetes. It's part of the disease. You have expressions of rage. That's part of the disease. And so I think it will help people, the family members too, if they can remind themselves of like, oh yeah, this is part of the Alzheimer's. Don't take it personally. Give him some space to express it. Whatever he said, let it go.
Well, you kind of learn in this journey as a guy anyway, maybe different, for women, but what it's like to have been a caveman.
Okay. Tell me more.
Well, I figured. Well, because you just say stuff you shouldn't do. You become
uncivilized.
Civilized and very pushy, and just like, saying stuff that you shouldn't say. So the other day, there was a guy, or just 2 days ago, and I'm in line for coffee. It was a Starbucks thing. And this guy was getting this, and I'll have, this muffin, and I'll have this muffin, and I'll have this muffin, and maybe that frilly thing over there. And the woman said, do you want anything else? And before I realized that, I said underneath my mask, yes, and I'll have a treadmill to go. So that's what you do. Yeah, and the guy looked at me, and I said, well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in some ways, you'd make a really great improv actor.
Yeah.
Person with Alzheimer's.
You probably want a treadmill to go if you're going to eat all that.
That's funny, Greg. Well, I'm being told we have about a minute left.
Okay.
Anything we've missed that you wanted to get in here?
One of the things I want to talk about quickly, and another friend of mine that I might have talked with you, but in just like you, Lisa, in the last couple of years, I've lost close to a dozen friends from this demon, women and men, and one of them, Ken Sullivan, lived in Scituate with his beautiful wife and 2 daughters, and he died in his 50s. Again, the stereotype. And Ken used to have, I'm looking at my notes here, Ken used to have beers with his good buddy Paul Boyce. And after Ken's diagnosis and his ongoing progressions, they talk about Alzheimer's, how unfair it is. And almost like the final scene in the movie Charlie from the book Flowers from Algernon, they talked about the day when Ken would not recognize Paul And Paul told him, you won't see it coming, Ken, but I will. I know, Ken replied. I'll just be along for the ride. Ken is dead now. And all of us watching today are along for the ride. And I just urge people to support the hard work of Cure Alzheimer's and finding a cure, because Lisa, as you know, all of us watching today are along for the ride. No, I wrote that down, so that's not true.
But that was beautifully prepared and so perfect. Yes. Yes, we are along for this ride. We don't get to choose whether we get Alzheimer's or not, but we can choose whether to do something about it. We can choose how we live with it, and we can choose to make sure that the next generation never has to deal with this.
God bless you.
Thank you, honey. Love you so much.
Love you too. Take care.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Wow, what a conversation. Greg and Lisa, thank you. And thank you for joining us again tonight. And thank you to everybody out there who is also joining us. I also want to say thank you for all the amazing questions that we've received. We have a lot of really invested and involved people, and I'm really grateful for that. So I want to start with actually the very first question we got, and I think it came in with about the first sentence between the two of you. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? And why is it that we hear so much more about Alzheimer's and not about dementia?
Okay. First of all, hello. It's good to see you again. Good to see you again, Greg. So I get this question a lot, and there's a lot of confusion. The two words are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same. So dementia is an umbrella term that is a symptom. It's not a diagnosis. So dementia means that you're having difficulties with memory, language, and cognition. And it can be a symptom of many different diseases and disorders. So it's the hallmark symptom of Alzheimer's, but it's not the only symptom. As you heard Greg talk about, he talked about the disinhibition of his emotions, especially with respect to rage. There's a lot of symptoms that ultimately happen with Alzheimer's, including planning and problem solving, coordination and balance. Many things begin to happen, not just memory loss. Dementia is also a symptom of many other diseases and conditions. So it's a symptom of a B12 deficiency. It's a symptom of depression. It's a symptom of Parkinson's, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal lobe dementia. So it's helpful to think of like high blood pressure is a symptom of heart disease, and dementia is a symptom of Alzheimer's. And so one of the things that I don't love about using them interchangeably is that I think that, there's some reluctance to say the word Alzheimer's even still among families. Like, we want to say like, oh, we soften it, right? Even physicians do this. The statistic goes something like 45% of people with an Alzheimer's diagnosis are not told by their physician that that's what they have. They're told they have dementia. That's not a diagnosis. That's a symptom. So I think that it's this sort of softening of like, oh, well, we won't use the A word. We won't say Alzheimer's. Sort of like like people didn't used to say we have cancer. They'd say, I have the big C. I think there's power in speaking the word Alzheimer's and not like sort of getting past the shame and the stigma and owning that this is what is going on. It helps us be in conversation and speak what is. So dementia is a symptom, not a diagnosis. I don't think it's funny that the question was, we don't hear as much about dementia. In my lived experience, people use the word dementia way more than Alzheimer's. So there's cousins of Alzheimer's. It's Alzheimer's and related dementias. There's a lot of other types of brain diseases and disorders that can cause dementia as a symptom as well.
So, Greg, there were a lot of questions about your lived experience, of course, and a lot of them were around, how long ago were you diagnosed? How is it that you're still as amazingly communicative and able to engage and full of energy and frankly joy as you are? How do you refill that tank when it empties? And what suggestions can you give to patients and caretakers for how to help others fill that tank?
Well, first of all, I thought I was supposed to wear the same clothes that we had in the video. So I would say, I don't want people to think I sleep in my clothes, but my wife is sitting next to me and she would say, yes, he sleeps in his clothes. So Alzheimer's, and the best thing people can do is listen to Rudy Tanzi, is a disease that can take 20 to 25 years to take its course. And it can start when you're in your 40s without symptoms. So anyone, and I'm glad you asked that question, frankly, because I think that's the most important question of the night. Anyone who says, well, my mother or father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they died 8 years later. And my diagnosis was 9-10 years ago. On a 20 to 25, I could have another 10-15 years journey in this course. And they go, well, my mom or my dad was diagnosed and they died 6 years later, 8 years later. And my response to them, and I tried to say it for anyone who's listening in good ways, because there are exceptions to every rule. I get that. But the rule is, it's a long-term disease, 20 to 25 years, and what I said before about when you're 40. And I said, let me simplify it. You don't get cancer the day you're diagnosed, and I deal with cancer. You don't get Alzheimer's the day you're diagnosed. And likely your mother or your father fought through this because they were scared. They didn't want to show what's going on. They suffered, like all people, for 10 years, 15 years before it really kicked in. And so if I can, with my mom, lift the veil on that, God, the universe, whatever we want to call it, blessed me with a good IQ. As a reporter, I learned to tell the story, and shame on me that I didn't. And my mother drove me forward. But anyone who thinks that this disease doesn't scare me when I tried twice to take my life is not listening. And this is a long-term disease. And at the end of my life, if I can, in some small way, wake people up to understand that you're not to care about Alzheimer's when you get the diagnosis. You need to watch symptoms early on, as Lisa would tell you. And as my mom would say, we need to talk about this. So I hope what I said made sense. But that's whoever asked that question, that's a very good question.
Well, I do want to follow up with actually some more questions about your strategies, but we all keep talking about Rudy Tanzi because, of course, we do that a lot around Cure Alzheimer's Fund, but we had a couple of people who actually weren't familiar with him. Can you two explain who he is to you and how you know him?
Let Lisa go.
Okay. And actually, just to like jump on what you just said, Greg, like this idea that that people can't fathom how has Greg been living with Alzheimer's for all of these years and he's, still doing so great. It's like, well, you are doing great and you work really hard at it. And this idea that, I think that, when you're young, like Greg, you noticed for you to have a memory problem at 59 was really noticeable. You're young and you rely on your memory to, do everything you're doing. So it was very painfully noticeable, right? When that started to happen. I think if you're 80 years old, there's this public expectation almost, and certainly misconception that, oh, well, you're just going to start to become forgetful because you're old, right? Like, oh, Nana's just getting old. We did that in our family. And so she had Alzheimer's symptoms for probably, I want to say 5 to 10 years before we really woke up to this isn't normal. So I think to Greg's point that a lot of people
live with Alzheimer's for many years before they're diagnosed. And so there's a lot of living with Alzheimer's going on out there, and people just focus on the dying. And so Greg's just such a wonderful, outspoken, vibrant example of what can living with Alzheimer's look like and sound like. So Rudy, Rudy and I go way back. So I knew Rudy when I was actually before I was a grad student at Harvard. I was a lab technician at Mass General East in the Charlestown Navy Yard. I was doing research on drug addiction at the time, and he was originally doing research with Jim Gusella on Huntington's disease. But then, of course, he switched to Alzheimer's. He was a grad student as well. He's just a little older than I am, but not much. He was playing piano at gigs at the Holiday Inn next to MGH, and so we go back that young, like our earliest days of doing research. I knew him back then, and would go to the same seminars and lab meetings, and I knew of his work, and we became friends, and I followed his career the whole way, and all of his research, and read Decoding Darkness and everything he's written with Deepak. And so he and I have like shared this sort of love of love the research he's doing, and I'm fascinated with everything he's up to. And he's such a superhero in my mind in terms of like when this disease is cured, part of the reason that happened is because of Rudy's life. Absolutely. Like if he's not the star of that solution, he's absolutely one of the major players. It cannot have been done without him. But we like getting together and chatting about all of it, from the science to him playing keyboard with Aerosmith to me writing books that get made into movies. So he's just a really good friend, and I couldn't admire him more.
First of all, amen to what Lisa said about Rudy, because he's a personal hero. But as I said before, my mother is a personal hero. When she was on a same path, to answer your earlier question, with me, that looking back 20 to 25 years, and she was afraid to talk about it. And but some of the family members and I noticed things, and it got worse and worse. And when my parents retired from Rye, New York, in Westchester County outside Manhattan, my dad was raised in the Bronx, my mom on the Upper West Side. I'm one of 10 kids. And I became the caregiver for both my mom and dad. My mom would fight. I noticed things were wrong. So people would say, oh, she's a beautiful woman. She's a genius. And they would say, oh, she's, everything is so good. And she was a banker. And one day she took me, and we fought because she was pushing back. I wasn't smart enough in Alzheimer's to know the rage. So I just would be pissed off at my mother, if I could say that. So things weren't good. If any of my brothers and sisters are watching, they would know. But she was a banker, went to the ATM machine, and she asked me to go, and she couldn't figure it out, and she started crying. And she said, I said, what's wrong, Mom? And she said, I don't know. I'm scared. My mind is going. And any animosity that we both had toward each other was washed away in that moment. The stereotype, which gets back to your question, was washed away. And my mom, for another 15 years after that, or longer, pushed on. And so I think we need to leave the stereotypes at the door. Right, Lisa?
Yeah, we had a suggestion in the Q&A that somebody make a movie called Alzheimer's Can Be Beautiful. And, Greg and Lisa, both of you, so much of the stories that you tell is about how to make the most of the life that you live with Alzheimer's disease and to focus on living that life. How do you help, as a family member, your loved one to have that most full life? How do you support them? If you have somebody in your life who seems to be declining but isn't acknowledging it, is it helpful or counterproductive to encourage them to talk about it?
That's a Lisa question.
Oh, I thought it was a you question too.
Oh, I forgot.
Well, so, it's interesting. So, like, Greg and I are both I think very optimistic people. We want to contribute something important and meaningful to others. So we can see the pinholes of hope and the beauty and what's still possible. Like, that's sort of where we lean. And that's not to minimize how ugly and horrible to minimize the losses. That's not to romanticize this disease in any way. And yet I think that, like, just too many people for too long have just written off this disease like, oh, you've got Alzheimer's, like, sorry, you're done. Or it's just too ugly and upsetting to, like, deal with. So I think getting that sort of message out that there can be humor in this, there can be, the days and the years can be still full of joy and love and meaning and friendship. I've only known Greg with Alzheimer's, and he's one of my best pals. So there's so much that's still there, and it's worthwhile. So how can you show up for your loved one with Alzheimer's? One of the biggest messages that I think that lands with people the most, that people take away as helpful, has to do with joining people with Alzheimer's in their reality. So it used to be said that, when someone is showing symptoms of dementia and it gets to the point where they don't really know you anymore, or aren't really sure what day it is or what's going on, or they start saying stuff that doesn't really make a lot of sense. It used to be that they'd say, oh, well, you should correct them and reality orient them. Like, no, today is Tuesday and it's December 1st and this is where we are and what we're doing. Or like, my Nana would sometimes wonder where her mother was. And so they used to say, well, I should tell her that, well, your mother died 30 years ago. No, none of that is okay. It's you want to become an improv actor. You want to be able to say yes and to anything your loved one with Alzheimer's is offering you, because you want to stay emotionally connected. It doesn't matter the conversation. Like Greg said, he might forget the conversation in 5 minutes, right? You might forget. Your short-term memory's going. So, but what you want to do is, after you've left that conversation, is feel what was felt, right? Like, you want to feel the love, you want to feel the connection. So, like, if my Nana says, I'm waiting for my mom, she's going to be here soon, it's not my job to correct her and say, your mother's dead, she's been dead for 30 years. Because now I'm just going to upset her, and this is going to be new information to her, and she's going to live the grief and loss of that news. And oh my God, like, what am I about to put her through by giving her that reality check? No, my job is to say yes and to agree to the reality she's just offered me, which is she's waiting for her mom, and join her with that. So I could say, okay, would you like me to wait for her with you? You want to have a cup of tea? Should we? And then start chatting about something while we wait for her mom. And then she'll feel comforted and connected, which might be what she was thinking of when she was thinking about her mom. And we have a chance to stay in relationship and together. So it's not about, the reality. It's about the emotion. It's about staying connected and offering memorable emotional experiences, not what was said. So, like, if my dad has Alzheimer's and he's in a nursing home and he doesn't know who I am anymore, and he's not going to remember that I visited today, I might be tempted to think, well, why go? Why visit him? He's not going to remember it. He doesn't know who I am. It's got, I got kids, I got stuff going on. It's a lot of work to get there. I get that. But what I tell folks is, he might not remember that I was there, and he doesn't know who I am anymore, but he'll remember how I made him feel. Like, I can create a good afternoon for him, and that alone is worth it. It's not about whether he remembers it and can articulate it tomorrow. It's about living in the moment, really. That's the biggest advice and lesson that I think I've learned, especially for the more advanced stages of the disease.
It's getting back to what Lisa said, in response to the questions, there are no two types of the experts, Rudy will tell you, of Alzheimer's that are the same. And why some people can fight longer. I have cancer, so why does cancer take people out earlier? And I'm not treating my cancer, it's my exit strategy than me. I don't, how many angels, as I said before in the interview, dance on the head of a pin, and how big is the pin? But it's about the fight. It's about not giving up. And anyone who's listening, I want to encourage them to the extent that they can, and their family members, not to give up, to keep fighting through. And when that time comes, it will come. But until that, get up and fight. And I think that's so important. And that's the lesson my mother taught me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten it.
So, Greg, one of the ways you talk about coping is by going to Pluto. Is that something that you know when it's about to happen? Is it something you can choose to kind of release stress? Or is it stressful when you feel it starting?
To the best of my ability to answer that, it's all of the above. There are times when it's just overwhelming. A good example, and my wife is here, she's listening. At Thanksgiving, we were with, we social distance, so I don't want bad letters, emails from people. But we got an Airbnb, but my son Brendan and his wife Lakin are on the South Shore of Boston, and we're there with my wife Mary Catherine and my son Brendan and my daughter Colleen, who has 2 children, Adeline and Timmy. I just want to put a plug in for them, and her husband Matt, and she's pregnant with the 3rd. But there were times when I just had to leave and go by myself. And there was one time that my wife said, "You're drifting." And I said, "I know, I just got to go by myself." And so there are times when you get so frustrated. It's a complicated disease, so the answer is complicated. When I have the ability to make that decision to say, I'm out of here. And I have scores of friends of mine who can speak just like me, as my mother could at her stage, which pushes back on the stereotype. But so there are times when I go, I got to get out of here. And there are times when I just say, I need a break, but I go sit by myself and I don't want anyone around me. And I've seen that with good friends of mine, and I call the place Pluto. And so at least you know where you're going to.
And when you go to Pluto, do you bring yourself back? Do you want someone else to help you come back?
Well, again, that's a very good question. If someone doesn't, I'm just trying to think this through, sorry. Often someone will put their hand on my shoulder and say, come back. Because they know, Lisa's shaking her head, they know where I am, come back. And if I'm alone, I don't come back for a while, because and again, I'm not complaining, I'm not a freaking hero, I'm just in it. But if I could use a Irish street word, this disease kicks the shit out of you. So when I'm on, it's kicking the shit out of me. But when I'm done, I gotta go. And I'll let Lisa follow up. And so sometimes, and I know I'm not particularly articulate, I go on my own to Pluto. Other times, the rocket ship takes me out. And I'll let Lisa, because she knows from medical things how that works.
No, you're so articulate. You're so funny. Oh, I'm not articulate. And then you're like the poet of Alzheimer's. My God, the rock. Yeah, I've seen both happen to you. I've seen where it looks like you're you and I, like when we were working on the X Prize together, and how many times did you speak a day? I mean, we were working so hard, and then there's so many people talking at once, and there's just so much stimuli and so much going on. And you can, like, it's like your gas tank, your fuel tank is just, going on empty. And I can see you consciously say, like, you're like, I'm going to go to Pluto, but you get quiet and you kind of zone out. And it's like you've tuned out all of the stimuli around you so that all of your cognitive energy can just focus on refilling that tank. Rather than it going outward, it's going back in, and you're just giving yourself the energy rather than giving it out to us. And other times I've seen it happen where we're like mid-conversation at a dinner table, and Greg's gone. Like it took you. So the rocket ship took you out, and you didn't necessarily mean to go. And then I've seen, like, whether it's me or someone else, like, gently touch you on the shoulder, like, hey, you good to come back now? Like, can you come back? Do you ever get afraid, Greg, that you'll go out to, like, is there this sense of, like, do you still feel like you have control over, like, the desire to come back? Like, okay, when I desire to come back and be in the room again, I have full control over getting that rocket ship back to Earth? Or is it sometimes feel like this could be elusive and I might not be able to get myself back?
Well, more and more, and my wife, Mary Catherine, can attest to this, I don't want to come back.
Yeah.
Okay? This is not a pity thing, but please, anyone who's listening,
I get it.
please, it's just understanding the disease. But I feel as a journalist, as imperfect as I am, in that I have an opportunity to encourage people to fight. And so, on my way out as a journalist, I wouldn't be doing my job if I just gave up. And so that's, to be honest with you, again, I've made as many mistakes as anyone else in journalism. I'm not putting myself above anyone else, trust me. But I feel that if I didn't encourage others, presumably a lot of these people from Massachusetts, but I love Bill Belichick, and I was a communication consultant with the Kraft Group for a long time, who I love, Jonathan and Robert Kraft. Do your job. And I feel that's what I'm here to do, is to do my job. And when my job is over, it's freaking over. It's okay.
Well, that actually leads perfectly into another one of our questions. And we are still getting questions. You two are really sparking a lot of thinking in our audience. But the question is this: if you are a patient or a caregiver, there's so much talk that seems to be about loneliness and shame and stigma. How do you get past that, and how do you become an activist and raise awareness the way the two of you are both doing? How do individual people turn this into a public fight instead of a private one?
Lisa.
Oh, I love that. That's a great question. So there are lots of ways. So one is, everybody's on social media today. Start posting, post links to Cure Alzheimer's Fund, Women's Alzheimer's Movement, Hilarity for Charity, post information. Like what I do is I try to humanize this, right? So I tell stories. And so Still Alice is the story of someone with Alzheimer's. Like, tell stories. If you know someone with Alzheimer's, post a story with a photo. Humanize it. Don't, like, the stats are scary. Like, those are just numbers and information that's intellectual and people will think it and know it for a minute, or maybe they'll remember it later, but it doesn't make you feel anything. So post stuff that gets people to feel something about the human experience of Alzheimer's. That's gonna help. If you see someone with Alzheimer's, don't look away. I think that the tendency, before you really know someone like Greg, before you live this experience, the impulse is, oh, I don't really understand that. It seems really uncomfortable and weird. And, oh, that person might do something strange or say something weird and make me feel uncomfortable. So now I feel better. Don't look away. Can I help you? Offer someone some more patience. If you see someone that needs a little more time, offer someone more compassion, be a little gentler. But I think that conversation fuels social change. I think that if we can get people talking about Alzheimer's and be comfortable talking about it, we can make people feel less stigma and shame, right? So secrecy breeds shame. Talking about it ends that secrecy. So social media begins it, and honestly, like reading books. So if you haven't read Greg's book yet on Pluto, read it with your book club and talk about it. That's a great way. Again, anything that invites conversation about Alzheimer's, about the lived human experience, is going to change the loneliness. It's going to really bring people back into community.
So we're also getting a lot of questions about what do you do? How do you think about this disease if you've lost a lot of family members to it? Greg, you talk a lot about your mom and how she went through this first. Were you worried about this disease when you were in your 50s? What led you to get a diagnosis as early as you did when you were still a very successful journalist?
Well, I was a caregiver for both my mom and dad. I was there at my mother and father's deathbed when they died. They came to Cape Cod. I'm from a large family, 1 of 10. And my brothers and sisters were great, but I was a guy living on Cape Cod at the time. And I saw the journey. You know, it's funny, when you do the drive-by, people will call up, whether it's a family member or someone else, and say, "Oh, I talked to your mom. Did they sound great?" And I'm there. As soon as they get off the phone, they don't know where they are. You know, in the moment, that's what the stereotype. Okay, I just forgot your question. I'm sorry.
No, I was asking, given your parents' experience, were you worried about this disease when you were in your 50s? And how did you get such an early diagnosis when you were clearly still very successful as a journalist?
Because I recognized the symptoms, and as investigative political reporters worked around the country, I was having difficulty doing my own job. And as I wrote in my book, I've had 2 traumatic head injuries that. A head injury like, you know, when you look in football and soccer and stuff like that, and Lisa can follow up on that, won't cause Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. But if the tumblers are loaded, as they were with me, it could bring it on early. And I couldn't multitask the way I did. And I went to my personal physician, who's a good friend, and we had a soul-to-soul talk, and he turned me on to other professionals, neurologists, and I went through the brain scans, the SPECT scans, the clinical test, and you know, the APOE4, and it was diagnosed. So at that point, I said, and this is the journalist in me, okay, what do? Do you go cry like a little baby, or do you try to write about it and to tell people? And I that's just my instinct, and that's what I did. And it was following instinct. I know I'm not being articulate here, but it was following instinct in my soul to say, that's what you're supposed to do. You know, you could say life is over. Life, if anyone is, well, of course, hopefully there's more than one person. Well, there are 2 people, Lisa and me on this, and you 3, but hopefully there are more than that. If anyone is listening, life is not, and this is the big takeaway, I think. And that question caused me to think, life is not over with a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Fight through it. There's strategies, and it's about faith, hope, and humor. However you want to define faith, however you want to define hope, however you want to define humor. That's my job to define it. But I feel as a journalist, my job is to say, life is not over. Reach out, fight, because there are people who will fight with you. Lisa?
I agree with all that, Greg. There was something that you hit on.
I got
Well,
pills. I have
I can
pills.
ask
You
you
want
a
my pills?
follow-up.
You want my pills, Lisa?
Exactly. Get some Aricept for
Well,
me.
given, Greg, that you're talking about how you had watched your parents experience, you did know what the signs were going to be. We've got people on this call who are in the same situation, who've lost a lot of family members, and now are finding themselves paranoid every time they can't find their car keys. How do people live with that? How do you distinguish normal memory frailty with the signs of Alzheimer's disease? And for the two of you, would you recommend genetic testing? Would you recommend, once it's available, the blood test that will indicate the presence of Alzheimer's pathology? Do you think that people in general are better off knowing?
I'll answer in a simplistic way and then hand off. I didn't want my kids to, there's 50% chance of my children. Okay. Sorry. It's documented. But so when my daughter Colleen was going to have, she's has two beautiful children, third in the way. She said, we had a personal conversation, and she said, I don't know if I want to have kids. And I said, your chances, you could walk off a curb and get hit by a bus. So in getting back to living in faith, hope, and humor, and I said, it's okay. If you want to get it, now I'm a big supporter of clinical trials and stuff because I've been through all that, and Lisa will pick that up. And before it got refined, I wasn't a big supporter of it, but I would tell even my own children, okay, so if you come out with that kind of report, there's a lot of, we're not in the spring now, but there's a lot of baseball left to play. And so I've encouraged them if they feel that they want to, but it's not hey, we're all going to die someday. So Alzheimer's is not a death sentence. We've already been given a death sentence, but I believe we're going to a better place, however someone wants to define it. So having said that, Lisa, you're on.
All right. So there's you're asking us like multiple questions here, Meg, which is like hard enough for me. And I'm like, how's Greg keeping track of all this? So, all right. So what's the difference between normal forgetting and forgetting due to Alzheimer's? And this question becomes really scary as you age into your 50s and you've had parents who've had this disease, because those normal things that happen more frequently as we age. So like that tip of the tongue, what's his name? The guy in that movie that I saw last week. And like, you can't come up with it. This normally happens 3 to 4 times a week to a 25-year-old. But if you're 55 and dad has Alzheimer's and your aunt has Alzheimer's, you start to become really scared. So weirdly that you asked this question, for the last 10 years, I've been talking to audiences around the world about Alzheimer's, and, Still Alice is a vehicle for that conversation. And everywhere I've gone, the conversation starts with Alzheimer's, but then it kind of shifts to like memory in general. And is this normal? Should I see a neurologist? And people are like, I walk into a room and I don't know why I'm in there. And I can't remember where I parked my car. And I don't know where my glasses are. And I am forgetting more words. And so I'll talk to people and get a sense of what's going on. And 99% of the time, these kinds of forgetting are really normal. And people, if they understood how memory and forgetting work, and that a lot of times forgetting is actually a very normal, essential part of being able to remember. I finally just said, I got to stop educating people one at a time in the ladies' room after my talks. And I wrote a book called Remember, the Science of Memory and the Art of Forgetting. And that's coming out in March. And there's actually a chapter in there on, so there's forgetting due to all kinds of normal things, and there's a chapter on forgetting due to Alzheimer's, and Greg is the star of that chapter. He spent some time with me answering some very specific questions. So like, for example, like the question of like, oh, if I can't find where I parked my car, is that a symptom of dementia? Does that mean I'm going to get Alzheimer's like my mom? It's like very different. The Alzheimer's forgetting is different. And it's like, so the example that Greg uses, like, so when I can't find my car, it's, I know I parked somewhere. If I'm in a garage, it was level 4, but I can't remember which side of the ramp, and I'm a little confused. And I should have just taken a picture of it. It's still like I remember that I parked somewhere around here. With Greg, his story is like, well, he went to the dump in his yellow Jeep back when he was driving, and I was telling him not to. But he went to the dump in his yellow Jeep, and he gets out and he dumps his trash, and he turns around and he's like, how'd I get here? He's standing right in front of his Jeep. How should I get home? Should I call my son? Should I ask someone here? Like, what do I do? And he's just sort of asking himself questions because he's a trained journalist, and he knows just keep asking questions. It's like maybe the right answer will come. And so eventually, like, sort of like the light flickered back on, and he looked at the Jeep he's standing in front of, and he's like, oh my God, that's my Jeep. I drove here. So he both forgot what happened, which is he forgot he drove to the dump, and he forgot that he owned the Jeep in front of him. So he didn't recognize the memory of that's my Jeep. So that's not normal forgetting. That's not what happens to me when I can't find my car, and probably not what happens to most of you. But if it's I don't remember that I drove here, or, I'm looking right at my car and I don't recognize that as mine, that's a symptom of pathological forgetting. So there are very clear distinctions. It's not like, I don't know why I walked into this room and therefore I should go see a neurologist. That said, I'm a big proponent of we've got to start treating diseases and conditions and mental illness, stuff from the neck up, just like we do stuff from the neck down. I am tired of this, like the brain is not an organ of the body. It's disconnected from the body. It's part of the whole container, people. So you go to the doctor for your annual physical and you're perfectly comfortable getting checked for heart disease, right? So you'll get your blood pressure taken and you'll get blood drawn to check for your cholesterol levels. And you're perfectly happy to look at whether you have high or low cholesterol, high or low blood pressure. You're looking for symptoms of heart disease. And then you might go on a statin if you've got high cholesterol, and the doctor will prescribe lifestyle changes for you, right? They'll say, you know what, you're at risk for a heart attack. So you need to exercise more. You need to eat a Mediterranean diet. Is this sounding familiar? You need to, get good sleep. So we're going to prevent you from getting a heart attack in 30 years. And so we're so happy to do this for heart disease. And you'll say, okay, I'll start walking more, right? And so you keep track of your steps, and you're doing this for your heart health. You can also do this for your brain health. So I think that we really need to be going to the doctors. And as part of our annual screens, I want cognition screening. I want to take a test and have a baseline, and something better than the mini mental state exam. For those of you who might not know this test, this is a 30-question test that's pretty simple. It's the genius test that Donald Trump used to show us that he was so smart because he passed the dementia screen. He's bragging to the world about how brilliant he is. But no, I do think that we want to take a screen that has some baseline to show, like, okay, this is where my cognition is at today, so that I can compare it next year and the year after that, just like we do for the heart, the kidney, women, if you go to the OBGYN, like all of the doctors that you go to every year to check on your other organs, you've got to do it for up here too, so that we can then prescribe what to do. Oh, and by the way, folks like Rudy Tanzi and the other scientists are going to get us biomarkers and ways of detecting whether we're at risk for Alzheimer's, just like are we at risk for heart disease. And so we're going to know sooner that we should be doing something about it. And it's sleep 7 to 9 hours a night. It's a healthy diet. It is aerobic exercise. These things are going to clear away amyloid beta and keep your brain healthy for longer. It's I think it just has to become part of our annual checkup. We got to not be afraid to ask, how's my cognition? How's my brain health?
It just as a quick follow-up, and I'll be quick, it's a narrative. One of the things for people with, first of all, Lisa, my God, great, excellent. But one of the things for someone walking in dementia, other forms of Alzheimer's, is keep asking questions. I'm going to tell a brief anecdote, which my wife has heard, my family's heard, Lisa's heard. But when I was a investigative reporter in my 20s at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix, my first assignment was in Superior Court, and I got notes here about that. And I went in, and I would say offense, defense, the prosecutors and the defense weren't prepared. And this woman who was the judge in Maricopa County Superior Court, she was angry, and she hit the gavel and she said, "It's over." That was my first story as a reporter coming from Cape Cod in the Arizona Republic, which is in the day, it had a subscription rate that, would rival the Boston Globe. And so I was really scared. So I figured I had to find out. So I followed her back to her office. I didn't want her to think that I was scoping her. But so sheepishly, I knock on the door, and she says, "Who's that?" I feel like this Wizard of Oz, And so I said, "Look, it's my first court experience. I need to know what happened. Can you?" And right away, she goes, "Yeah, sure." And she told me, and she said, "Are you going to cover the courts?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "You keep coming back, you keep asking questions, and I will talk to you." So we became good friends. Later, she got appointed to the Arizona Court of Appeals. I was out covering the Arizona governor's office. We would hang out, talk. We're good friends. A year later, Ronald Reagan called her and made her the first woman Supreme Court Justice of the United States, Sandra Day O'Connor, who taught me court reporting and told me, as Lisa just said, keep asking questions. And little did I know at the time we were on parallel tracks. And I'm hoping her son, Brian, who's a good friend of mine, is watching. Her husband went through Alzheimer's. She's dealing with dementia issues. And I stay in touch with the family. But in simplistic terms, for people who didn't go to Harvard, Lisa, keep asking questions. And Sandra Day O'Connor taught me that, and I will take that for a long time. But what Lisa just said was so articulate. I just wanted to add to it.
Well, I can't imagine a story better than that to end on. And I know we're past time. So I just want to say thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to our watchers for all the wonderful questions. I want to thank our board members, Bob Greenhill, Phyllis Rappaport, Henry McCants, Sherry Sharp, and Jeff and Jackie Morby for allowing this to happen. And I want to encourage everybody out there to keep fighting and keep asking questions, to read Lisa and Greg's and Rudy's books, because they are all wonderfully inspiring, and they tell us that this is a fight that we can win in our own way.
Lisa has a new book that's going to be into a movie now. I just want to give her a plug. I'm just saying, Lisa, just...
Well, we know how the last one went, so it will definitely be a good one to watch. But thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy, and we will look forward to talking to you again very soon, I hope.
You bet. Thank you so much, Meg. Thank you, Greg.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.